listening to the Cross-Check NHL Show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Andrew Berkshire and Mary Clarke.
Hello and welcome to the Cross-Check NHL Show. Thanks for making the Cross-Check NHL Show your first listen every Tuesday and Friday. We're free and available on all platforms, now including YouTube. My name is Mary Clarke, staff writer for The Win, and you can follow me on Twitter at Mary C. Clarke. I'm here with Sarah Avampato, host of Locked On LA Kings on the Locked On Podcast Network. On this Tuesday edition of the Cross-Check, Andrew was not available to record today's show, so Sarah has stepped in to help me out. The Kings have been better than expected this year, so we're going to dive into why and what their ceiling could possibly be. Next, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has cast a pall over, well, everything. So we'll discuss, that, Alex Ovechkin's ties to Putin, his response to the events, and also how the hockey world is responding, because that's the biggest story in hockey right now, and we definitely don't want to miss that. Finally, to end out with some levity, the Maple Leafs need to get Jack Campbell help because Saturday's 10-7 victory over the Red Wings was something else, and boy howdy is that team on something right now. So Sarah, before we start off today's show, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty great. We're going to talk about my team being surprisingly good, so I think it's a great way to start out the show.
Yes, exactly. I figured I'd rather, talk to you about the Kings first and then get into the heavy stuff. Because like I was saying off the show, Andrew and I really haven't talked about the Kings a lot this year. I've mentioned them briefly at the very beginning of the season because they were a team that I had kind of picked as a dark horse, and I'm kind of glad that my pick is actually, working out here, because usually my predictions aren't right, but I was really hoping the Kings would be. But, since Andrew and I are mostly focused like on the East Coast and in the Eastern time zone, it's harder for us to stay up late. I mean, Andrew's dealing with family stuff, so that's why he's not here. So he upended his entire sleep schedule for the Olympics. So there's no way he can watch late night hockey unless he really, really has to when, the Canadians are out west.
Right.
And I, watch the occasional late night hockey too, but I have my own job. I've got stuff to do. So it's great to have you here because I think this is maybe the first time we've talked in some time. Like we've either done a show on the Locked On Network together, or we may have. I think we had you probably in the summer when we did our big like interviews with all the Locked On hosts about what their teams were doing. But it's been some time, so it's really great to have you here. So thank you again for joining the show. It's we're gonna roll right into the Kings because I want to talk about some fun stuff first before we have to get into the heavy stuff. So the Kings, as of Monday, they're going to play Monday night, I believe, but as of Monday, they're on a 5-game winning streak, which is second in the Pacific with 65 points and 53 games. And they are really pushing the teams in the West and in the Pacific specifically. They've been really fun to watch this year. I mean, it hasn't all been, sunshine and flowers and stuff like that, but they have been a team that has surprised a lot of people. I think that the Pacific this year has been kind of, anyone's game, it seems, and it's really great from, a watching perspective. But I guess I want to start off with, was this expected at all for the Kings? Because I know I said I picked them as a dark horse, but I really thought that was kind of an outside shot because, their future is projecting more to be, it's the future is when they'll probably be better than they are now. But what was this expected at all from the Kings?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things. This is one of those things that it really depends who you asked. Because if you asked, people who cover the Kings, people who are around the team, they said this was a possibility. My kind of hot take at the beginning of the season was that this team would make the playoffs. In reality, I kind of pictured them as more of a bubble team, fighting for all those wild card spots. But at the end of the day, I was like, this team is capable of doing it with the additions that they made in the offseason. If you look at all of I love analytics. I'm not good at them, but I love what they bring to the sport. But if you looked at all of the fancy stats models, all of them said the Kings were going to be one of the worst teams in not just the division, but in the league. Now, granted, those models didn't take into account Jonathan Quick playing like it's 2012 again. They didn't account for Phil Danault having a career high year in terms of, offense. Adrian Kempe is blowing all of his past performance out of the water. And then looking at, competing teams, they didn't count on Seattle just doing whatever Seattle is doing. There's just a lot that has gone weird in the Pacific this year that has really helped the Kings out a lot. But if you watched this team, if you looked at what Rob Blake has been doing over the past several years to sort of remodel this team, the Kings, they just did their like annual state of the franchise thing for season ticket holders. And, they sort of re-outlined, this is what Rob Blake's plan has been since he came in as GM. And this year, 2021-22 season is the year that, they had the cap space to start making additions. They had the room on the roster in terms of spots, in terms of money to start pushing to be a more well-rounded team. And right now they're really right on track with where they should have been based off of that plan. The numbers just didn't believe that it was going to happen.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. But I think what I really also want to ask about is Jonathan Quick, because you touched on, is he's playing like it's 2012 all over again. And it feels like ever since that the Kings sent that tweet that's like 8 years or whatever of our goalie being the best in the world or whatever it is, I'm paraphrasing that, but you all know the tweet because it's been memed to heaven and back. But ever since that tweet, it feels like Jonathan Quick has fallen off a cliff. But so far this season, he has a .913 save percentage in 30 games and has actually been quite good for this team. I know those numbers are about average, but previously Quick has been anything but average, it feels like. And that's also made him a target. I've heard his name thrown about in trade rumors because we're when this episode goes out, it'll be March 1st. So we are in the time of the trade deadline, and I don't expect the Kings to move on from Quick. So are you surprised to hear his name thrown out there, considering the Kings are in such a big, they're in a playoff spot. I mean, they are, at least as of Monday, they are 3 points behind the Calgary Flames, who are just blisteringly hot, incredible in the last couple of months of play. And they really seem like they might take the division at the end of the day. But do you think that, are you surprised to see Quick in those rumors, considering, the Kings are doing so well for themselves right now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, over the off season, at the beginning of this season, I would have put a lot more credence into, the Kings might look to move him. But, right now, realistically, they need him. And there's not a return that they're going to get that's going to make the team better. And I don't think, at this particular point in time. And I think that Cal Peterson is the heir apparent, but I don't think if the Kings want to go on a playoff run, they need both of those goalies. Their kids in the AHL aren't ready to come up yet in terms of goaltending. So, I'd be curious to see where the rumors are coming from, but I could see maybe in the off season, the Kings doing something with him, depending on how this season shakes out. But I think that he is on this roster until the end of the season. They're not going to move him now with how well he's been performing.
Yeah, it makes no sense. The Kings are in prime position to basically play. I mean, I thought they would kind of play spoiler to a team, but with the way the Pacific is shaken out, I mean, Vegas is 3 points behind them. And they just got Jack Eichel back. And I know that they're, basically there's no room in their cap to make moves at the deadline, but you can never count out Vegas. So the Pacific is at least the most interesting, division. And of course, that isn't even talking about Edmonton, who is, still in this race. I think Andrew and I have said it multiple times that the Pacific is the most interesting division to watch down the line, because it basically feels like everything else is nearly locked up, at least in the East. The East spots are all assured essentially now. So all eyes should be turning towards the West, and specifically the Pacific, because you've got such incredible teams out there, and the Kings have been, making a splash in the biggest way, and, taking advantage of opportunities. Because like you said, I don't think anybody could have predicted Seattle to be this bad. I thought that they may, push the teams in the West just a little bit. But there's no way we all thought this was going to end the way it has, and it's kind of disappointing in some parts, but they clearly have a plan they want to follow there in Seattle. And I think it's too soon to tell, if it worked. But the Kings have definitely been jumping on an opportunity here, and they shouldn't squander it. But you mentioned, Adrian Kempe has a career best 25 goals in 50 games. Anze Kopitar is nearly a point per game player with 50 points in 53 games. You also said Phil Danault, who was an interesting offseason acquisition for them, considering he did. He kind of broke out in the playoffs last year for Montreal. What has he been bringing to this team that, is filled with a lot of, young up and coming players? I'm thinking, Quentin Byfield is, a big one that comes to mind. But, what has Phil Danault brought to this team so far this year?
I think first off, the fact that we have him as a second line center means that Quentin Byfield, for example, doesn't have to take on more than he's ready for yet. He's gotten into a bunch of NHL games at this point. He clearly is, a star in the making. Sometimes you see those plays from him where you're like, no one else on this team would have done that. But he's not quite ready yet to be taking on top competition night after night. And Phil Danault can help spread that out. The Kings have been very thin down the middle over the past few years, and they've been sort of filling it with like patchwork, this random guy, that guy. They tried to make Adrian Kempe a center for years, and everyone was like, please stop doing this. He's not a center. It's no coincidence that Kempe is having his best year when they put him back at his natural wing position. Like, surprise, that's how it works. But so Danault has added that sort of extra dimension down the middle, and the offense. Everyone says, oh, you don't sign Phil Danault to score goals, which is true. You sign him to be that irritating guy in the corner that gets the puck back, who plays defensively responsible, every second he's on the ice. But the fact that he's scoring goals is really fantastic for this team. And that defensive ability means that he's fantastic at faceoffs. It means that Kopitar doesn't have to always be the one out there in like late game situations, to take important faceoffs, that you have Phil Danault there for that. And yeah, maybe in a couple years, he's going to be a somewhat overpaid third line center, but that's a good problem to have. And he's just really been very quickly a fan favorite on this team. Kings fans embraced him immediately, and he's just been delightful to have. And also, like, if he gets to ruin Vegas's hopes and dreams at any point in time, because I know that that's his like core competency, is just ruining Mark Stone's day, like, A+, I'm ready.
Oh yeah, man, it's wild to think how the playoffs went last year. And specifically, I know this is a little bit of a tangent to talk about Montreal because where they were and where they are now, and a lot of that has to do with the pieces they lost.
Yeah.
Whether due to unfortunate injury, stuff like Carey Price, or just letting players like Phil Danault go. And it's really funny because Mark Bergevin ended up following him. So who's to say if that's a coincidence or a really funny happenstance, or I know people were tossing around that because Bergevin was linked to the Kings for some time, and Phil Danault was there. Like, there's a whole lot, but it's just fascinating to see where the pieces have fallen over the last it's not even been a year. So it's been wild, and it's great that the Kings have been a recipient of all this good fortune, and it's cool that Phil Danault is a fan favorite because he seems like he would be. He doesn't score goals, but he plays the type of game that hockey fans love, and is kind of underappreciated because he isn't a big star, and that's kind of a player, especially like hardcore hockey fans will latch onto, because it almost feels like he's underrated in a sense. So that's really cool. So before we move on to the heavy stuff, the Kings are in this playoff position. And a team just like them, the Ducks, was previously, knocking on the door for a playoff position, but they have since fallen out and are in the wild card race. In your opinion, are the Kings going to stay where they are? And what is their potential ceiling for this team this season? And, does that include stuff like adding at the trade deadline? Because, like I said, that's coming up, and that's I think it's going to be a really interesting year this year. So what do you think, if they're going to, stay in the playoff race? Are they going to, do stuff at the trade deadline, or will they kind of fall out like Anaheim and even San Jose has?
I think they stay in the playoff race. I mean, I will say that a lot of it depends on, if both Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson turn back into pumpkins tomorrow, we have problems. But, so far this team is playing consistently. Whenever they have a bad game, they bounce back from it. They learn from the mistakes that they made. They had a really tough game against Edmonton recently, and then they bounce back from that to go on this winning streak that they're on right now. So they're showing the capability to move on and improve from, errors that they made. And I think that one thing that the Kings have that the Ducks don't necessarily have is better depth. Right now, there's at least 3 or 4 players in the AHL who should be in the NHL. And it's just, an issue of numbers of, maybe it's not a perfect fit, but they're NHLers. And so if there are injuries to the Kings, particularly in the forwards group, there are many guys who can come right up, jump in, and play at an NHL level. And the Ducks, we've already seen when they've had injuries, they don't necessarily have the depth to kind of help push them forward. Some of their losing streaks have come at times where some of their top players have been out. So I think they stay in this hunt. I think, are they winning the Stanley Cup? No, I'm not going to go and say that. But, I think that depending on their matchup in the first round, they could maybe, they could make some noise. I'm not expecting, greatness, but I think for this team that has so many young players on it, for guys like Quentin Byfield and them to get a taste of what the playoffs are like, I think is only going to help them in the future to make them, know what they have to do to succeed. So yeah, no, they're not going to be the next Stanley Cup winners. And if they are, we can replay this forever to make fun of me for being wrong, but
who cares? You'll have won anyway.
Right, exactly. That'll be the least of my problems. But I think they can at least make their presence known and say hey, we're actually a legit team. So
yeah, and it makes me happy not only because my prediction has panned out so far because like I said, my predictions usually don't pan out in this way, but also it's nice to see the Kings rebound in this manner. They have a lot of really awesome young players that I've been, interested to, watch and follow their careers. And they just seem like a likable team for a while. It seems like the Kings were just very stagnant, and, keeping, the old guard around. And while there's still some of them there, a lot of them are performing better than expected. And, now the new crop of players has come in, and it feels like a nice seamless transition. And a lot of times organizations don't get that seamless transition from, the old guard to the new kids and stuff like that. So it's been great to watch the Kings this year, and I'm looking forward to watching more of them. Now, though, we're going to transition to heavy topics, but it has to be talked about. Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Like I said, cast a pall over not just sports, but the world as a whole. But it also directly impacts hockey because Alex Ovechkin has been a Putin supporter, and also stuff with international hockey has recently come to light too. So we're going to, discuss as best we can that topic coming up right after this. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. For all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right up to the next Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Sarah. Like I said, this is a difficult topic to cover, and I'm as well informed as I guess I can be. But it's one of those things where it's tough to be informed and straddle keeping your mental health up as best you can. So I don't know how much you know about these topics because I don't talk to you all the time. So it's not like I talk to Andrew constantly in DMs or on this podcast, so we're a bit more in tune with one another. But I think this is important to talk about. So like I said, Russia's invasion of Ukraine happened Thursday last week, something around then. It's been a handful of days, and it's been a long long weekend, long couple of days for a lot of people. So if you've checked out, that's okay. But it impacts hockey in interesting ways because Alex Ovechkin, obviously we all know who that is, has had ties to Vladimir Putin, has been an outspoken supporter of Vladimir Putin, and was asked about the Russia's invasion of Ukraine Friday, I believe, in Philadelphia before their Saturday game against the Flyers. And this is what he had to say, at least from ESPN, I'm quoting this from. He said, please, no more war. It doesn't matter who is in the war. Russia, Ukraine, different countries. We have to live in peace. He also said, when asked Friday whether he supports Russia's invasion of Ukraine, he said, I'm Russian, right? It's not something I can control. It's not in my hands. I hope it's going to end soon. There's going to be peace in both countries. I don't control this one. And he said this is a hard situation for him. He has a lot of friends in Russia and Ukraine, and it's hard to see war, and he hopes it's going to be over soon. So there's been a lot of discussion on hockey Twitter about Ovechkin, support of Putin, hockey journalism takes, because it's a hard situation. Journalists are trying to do their jobs, and asking questions obviously is part of their job. Asking hard questions is part of their job. That's why I admire so much about, journalists such as, Rick Westheads, and the stuff with all the Chicago nonsense that's happened. Those are real journalists doing incredible work. But the journalists had to ask the question here, at least to Ovechkin, at least to me, because I know there's an argument of like, how can you ask Ovechkin to put his family in danger, his friends in danger? But then there's also like, what other answer are you going to expect? He's not going to do that. But journalists have to ask the question, in my opinion. They really do. Even if they know the answer is going to be this, like not dodging the question, but not really answering anything significant.
Right.
That type of stuff. And like I said, I see it from like both angles here of like, journalists have to ask the question, but you can't have expected Ovechkin to say anything but what he did, coming out to refute Putin here, is a difficult stance for athletes to take. The biggest thing is we saw it with Artemi Panarin just last year, I believe, who voiced his support for Russian opposition leader, and then that story came out about him hitting someone, I believe, when he was like younger, and it all basically stemmed from an Instagram post or an Instagram comment. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Sarah, but it's just a very difficult conversation to have, because there is no, like, I don't want to say there's no right or wrong answer here. Ovechkin has shown his support for Putin in the past. He was part of a movement called Putin Team in 2017, has openly, campaigned for him, has, I believe his picture on Instagram is of him and Putin. So it's at least intrinsically linked to him as a person. But for him to denounce Putin in this way would probably make his life very difficult right now. But there is also, something to be said of, should he have just anyway, because he's such a big outspoken part of the hockey community, and people will listen to his voice. There's a lot of things up in the air here. There's no, I guess, right or wrong answers here, because it's a very gray topic. So do you have any thoughts on this? Because we'll at least get the Ovechkin stuff out of the way first before we talk about, the wider hockey world's response, because there's a lot to talk about there too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the tough thing is, it's like, yeah, we want, especially, hockey journalists have this, they're in this position where they're dealing with players from all across the globe, and, they have the access to ask questions like this. So yeah, I think that, they do need to ask this question, especially like you said, knowing Ovechkin's past history being linked with Putin and that they're basically buddies. But at the end of the day, no, Alex Ovechkin isn't going to go out and say, yeah, I wanted war. Like, no, he's not going to say that. He's also not going to come out and say, like, this is terrible, I denounce what Putin's doing. Like, he's no matter what he believes, and we have no idea what he believes, he's kind of in between a rock and a hard place. What is he going to say? Either way, that is going to keep him safe. His family's in Russia. Even if he doesn't agree with this, knowing that he's friends with Putin, essentially, what is he going to do? Do I think his answer was great? No. It was very, someone from PR scripted it, and then he said it in his own Alex Ovechkin kind of way. But we, at the same time, though, we have seen other athletes, not necessarily in hockey, but, I was just seeing before we started talking, there was a couple posts from a tennis player who is Russian who came out and made some statements. There was a guy playing tennis who, tennis always does the, like, you do a little signature thing on the camera. There was a Russian player who wrote, like, no war, please. So there are, Russian players in sports across the sports world who are coming out and taking stances and saying no. And I think Ovechkin is just in that very unique position of being basically the face of Russian hockey, and being the guy who, his Instagram picture is like, yo, buddies with Putin. What is he supposed to do no matter what he thinks, or what his true feelings are? But, it's frustrating. It's one of those things we know is true about Alex Ovechkin. We know that he has this, and, you just sort of have to shovel it out of your mind if you're trying to root for him as a hockey player, to be like, oh, I'm going to ignore that he's actually buddies with this guy who is basically kind of a dictator in a way. And it's just, whenever you're reminded of it, it's just sort of that, like, screeching halt of, oh, that's right. This is actually, it's not just a funny, oh, ha 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 thing. Like, there's actually something serious here.
Yeah. And I agree with all of that, especially, because Ovechkin's name comes up in a lot of talk, in terms of, him eventually, hopefully going to break Gretzky's record. And it is a big part of him, and definitely something that shouldn't be discounted, but not all hockey players. Go to your favorite hockey player's Twitter likes.
Yeah.
Right now.
It's a disaster.
Yes,
it's a disaster.
It is. It's a disaster. And it's just a tough conversation to have, because this is such a multifaceted situation. Obviously, there shouldn't be war here. What Russia's doing is wrong. And it sucks that Ovechkin, whether he believes it or not, can't come out and, publicly denounce this in the way we want him to. But there's a lot of factors at play. We don't know everything about Ovechkin's life. I don't know how private of a person he is. And there's things we don't know, so it's hard for us to make judgments on this. But I think it's fair if, you wanted more from him. I think that's a valid take all across the board. It is just a very difficult situation to navigate. And I think, the journalist did a good job in asking the questions, even though we knew the answer. And at least Ovechkin faced the media.
Right.
I know that's kind of, a baseline. Everybody should, but
right.
At least he faced the media here. And even if he gave a canned answer, it is at least an answer here. So we'll at least move off of the Ovechkin talk, because I think it's been, done to death. It is a very difficult, like I said, very difficult conversation to have. And it is definitely not something I am the most familiar with. I usually take the stance of, if you don't know something, you can just, stay out of the conversation and let the people that actually do know something talk. But, I'm on a podcast that reaches, some people, at least I think, on the internet. So I have to have some opinions and at least knowledge about this. But the other big thing about this is the fact that the hockey world as a whole is getting involved in this. The IIHF, at least on Monday, as we're recording, or right before we're recording, they're set to meet. And it seems as if they're going to bar Russia and Belarus from the organization. The big thing is the, I believe, World Juniors and Men's Championship are supposed to be in Russia in 2023. So probably by the time you hear this, there will be more information known about that, but don't be surprised, I guess, if it is moved out of there, because it's not good. But also a big thing is the IOC recommends, the executive board recommends no participation of Russia and Belarusian athletes and officials. There's more than just hockey here too. I don't know the full wide scope of the leagues that are, banning Russia and stuff like that from their leagues, but this is at least going to impact hockey, because like I said, the World Juniors and the Men's Championships are supposed to take place in Russia next year. So this is at least more wider than just asking Russian athletes about, how they feel about war and how they
Mhm.
feel about Putin. This is going to have ramifications for stuff in the longer term, because, this was supposed to, these, events were supposed to take place next year in Russia. And they're, talking about moving them and stuff. So do you have any thoughts on that? Anything else I missed? Because like I said, this is a situation that is evolving.
Mhm.
And like I said, some of this information could be out of date by the time you hear this, but this is at least what we know, as we're recording.
Yeah, and I think, the hockey world kind of jumping in and starting to get involved with making changes, it feels very significant. Because let's face it, the hockey world does it's the best it can to not have to make statements or get involved with anything. And if they do, it's just sort of like half-hearted, like, oh, don't do that again. But also, especially knowing that, like, you know, depending on like what origin story of the KHL you believe, like Putin, like he's a hockey nut. Like that's his thing. He
Yeah.
plays hockey games, and oh wow, Putin won because he scored 12 goals. Like, of course he did. Who's
Yeah.
gonna say you didn't let him score on you? But the KHL has its tentacles, or the government and Putin has its tentacles into the KHL, and so the IIHF and hockey in general kind of coming together to say, okay, you know what, you guys have to sit this one out. Like it feels like an ego blow to Vladimir Putin, because like that's his thing.
Yeah.
And so yeah, saying okay, the IIHF is actually taking a stand and saying you guys can't play. I think is really significant. And then outside of that, I've also seen reports that Sweden, Finland, and Czechia have all agreed to not invite Russian teams to what's called the Euro Hockey Tour, which is like tournaments that aren't part of the IIHF, but just sort of stuff that happens mid-season. So they have all sort of stood up and said this. The IOC, I feel like they're it's as toothless as you would expect anything from the Olympic Committee, but they at least said something.
Yeah.
And it stinks that the people being harmed by this in terms of not being allowed to participate. What does a 16-year-old boy who was supposed to play in World Juniors have to do with this? But that's kind of the only recourse that the hockey world has, is to say, okay, you can't do this thing. And it'll also be interesting to watch the KHL going forward.
Yes.
We know they canceled the rest of their regular season and are going to go right to playoffs. And so there's very few Americans or Canadians left in the KHL at this point, because obviously the teams that are kind of stacked going to the playoffs are largely made of Russian or European players. But there's issues with what are those players going to do? Because getting flights out of Russia now is very difficult. Their airspace has been restricted for Russian flights going over Europe and stuff. So, for those players left on teams over there, what are they going to do? Do they have any choice even? Do they have to stay? Teams have already withdrawn from the KHL, both for the playoffs, and then Riga, the team in Latvia, has withdrawn entirely. There's been rumors. I don't know how true it is, but like rumors that are saying that next year in the KHL, they're not going to allow import players. And so it's basically just going to be, Russia, Belarus. Like they've already basically insinuated that China isn't participating at all next year in the KHL. So it's going to vastly change the landscape of hockey as we know it, because so many guys go over to the KHL because they're like, I can make money there. I'm not making an NHL team, but whatever, I'll go play in Russia for a couple of seasons. If all those guys come back and still want to keep playing, it's going to make the AHL and the ECHL look a lot different. So it has this very big trickle down effect that like we're not going to really feel the extent of for quite some time, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And good for mentioning the KHL. Like I said, there was probably going to be something I forgot. And the KHL is huge in this regard too, because I think it speaks volumes that they canceled the rest of the regular season and went right to the playoffs. And I had seen and heard. I think I listened to the 32 Thoughts podcast where they were saying that that it is the like them canceling the regular season. They said it was COVID related, but was it? I think that was them that said it. I listened to too many podcasts, so I could be wrong. But regardless, it's at least something I had heard from one of the podcasts I listened to. But this situation is tough all around. And I think we're all trying to navigate it as best we can, whether that be doom scrolling or and that's not a good thing.
Right.
Doom scrolling or taking time off social media. And like I said, I think it's good if you want to step back and say, it's hard to form opinions because I'm not informed. Like I said, that is the stance I often take for stuff like this. Not all the time, but like it is, to suddenly get a world war dumped on you like this in the middle of your week when you're just trying to get by. It's very difficult to comprehend and learn all this information because we as a society aren't supposed to be
Yeah, no.
inundated with this
It's so much.
with the
Yeah.
amount of information we're inundated with. We're not supposed to be. Our brains aren't made for that. So I definitely recommend taking time to set aside for your own mental health. And hockey will still be there. It's still going on. Like I said, trade deadline is coming up, and we're going to talk about some hockey nonsense because it's always the Maple Leafs. Because like Andrew said last episode, the Maple Leafs are the main character of the NHL. But I think I can speak for us both here that this what Russia's doing is wrong, and we hope the best for everybody in Ukraine and the surrounding countries that are, also in danger. It is, seeing this happen from America is it. I don't think we can explain how different it is for us just sitting here and having opinions for somebody who is living in Europe right now. So I think we're doing the very best we can. So I, recommend you all, take a step back, go outside. It's by the time you hear this, it'll be March 1st. So that means spring is hopefully around the corner, or if you live somewhere nice and warm and toasty, you can just walk outside, and that must be very nice. Not here in Pennsylvania, you can't.
No.
But yes, I think that's all we really have to say about this topic. So thank you, Sarah, at least for helping me navigate it, because it is it's difficult to talk about. It really is. But we're going to, make a hard cut from that because there's no real good way to do it. We're going to make a hard cut from that. Then we're going to talk about, like I said, the main character of the NHL, the Toronto Maple Leafs, because God, that game on Saturday was something else. And if I heard Steve Dangle scream before in that other game, oh boy. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about with the Maple Leafs. So that'll be coming up right after this. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts in their computer, choosing only the brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. RockAuto.com is a family business, serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. They have everything from engine control modules and brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. The RockAuto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. Quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle and choose the brands, specifications, and prices you prefer. Best of all, prices at RockAuto.com are always reliably low, and the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Why spend up to twice as much for the same parts? So go to RockAuto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box? So they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. All right, Sarah, to cap off the hockey parts of this episode, I thought it'd be only fitting to come back around to the main character Toronto Maple Leafs after Andrew and I discussed them last episode, because I think we needed just a little bit of tomfoolery in this episode, because there's been, like I said, we just came off a really heavy topic. So I wanted to, talk a little bit more about the Maple Leafs, because it's always about the Maple Leafs. But God, they need to help Jack Campbell out, because Toronto beat Detroit 10-7 and gave up 5 goals in the third. And it was something. It was really, really something. And, hockey Twitter was having a ball. It was just fun time. But, jokes and memes aside, the Toronto Maple Leafs have kind of a bit of a problem on their hands. Like I said, I think they need to help Jack Campbell out. He had, before New Year's Day, he had a .937 save percentage before New Year's Day. Since then, or at least, heading into Monday, he has an .887 save percentage after. That is not good, Sarah. That is not good at all. And when you have Jack Campbell and I believe Peter Mrazek is their is their backup, who I think has had a handful of good games here and there. I feel like one of his more recent games was actually kind of good. Maybe, I don't know. I could be lying, but you don't want to pin your hopes on Peter Mrazek, but they need to get Jack Campbell help because he's played 38 games this year, the most in his career. And he is a good goaltender, but they need to give him some rest and they need to give him help because it's not good, Sarah.
It's I mean, first off, I feel like I have to apologize to every Detroit Red Wings fan out there because I wasn't watching that game until I happened to look over at Twitter and saw that like everything had gone totally banana pants. And I turned the game on because I saw, Twitter was saying it was late in the game. It was the Maple Leafs were leading by 1 goal, and then Detroit got a power play late in the game, and I was like, fine, let's turn this on. And then Toronto proceeded to score like 2 very quick goals, and I was like, oh, sorry, I ruined this for you guys. But yeah, that game was just I don't know what happened. I was very glad that I was not on, neither of those teams are my team.
Oh yeah.
I had no responsibility for that game. But yeah, I mean, I love Jack Campbell. He, came to Toronto as part of a trade with the Kings. He really resurrected his career in the Kings organization. They did a lot to kind of help him build up both like the physical game and the mental game to be able to withstand times like this where your performance just takes a nosedive. And, Jack Campbell is a guy who, before he came to the Kings, he would just let that snowball. And it's going to be really interesting to see how he responds to this. Like, does he keep kind of nosediving or does he kind of even things out? And I can't blame it all on Jack Campbell. I mean, like, look at the Toronto Maple Leafs and their like lack of commitment to defense. He can only do so much. He's only one person. But yeah, the Leafs deciding that he is a starter when he's never had that much of a workload in his career at this level maybe it wasn't a smart idea. And yeah, Peter Mrazek is good in stretches, but he's also hurt all of the time.
Oh yes.
And yeah,
he was on the Flyers.
Right,
and the whole big thing about him is he couldn't turn like, 180
Right.
degrees or whatever. Like he had a very limited movement in net, and it showed in like a couple of goals he let in because he just couldn't turn. He just like was like moving like in the crease but couldn't turn. It was a whole thing. But yes.
Yeah, like what are they gonna do? I mean, they had kind of planned to kind of split the workload more evenly, and then Mrazek got hurt at the beginning of the year, and so he's been in and out, and now they've just rode Jack Campbell the whole way. And yeah, I mean, Toronto needs a second goaltender they trust, and if it's not Peter Mrazek, they need to work on that. And then B, like I don't know. I don't watch enough Maple Leafs games. I try not to I try not to pay attention to the main character of hockey too much. But
I think that's understandable,
right? I get enough of them when we play each other, and that's fine. But they, is it defense in terms of defensemen? Is it forwards kind of not committing to the 200-foot game? Like whatever is happening there needs to not happen if they want to avoid being the main character of Twitter during the playoffs when they flame out again in the first round to some like, I don't know, like the Blue Jackets are somehow going to get back in the playoffs. And then,
they're probably going to face either Tampa or Florida, which is,
that's horrible. No, that's not going to end well for them.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it is. They're staring down, inevitability. It feels like they really are. But you make a good point. I think it's less so on the forwards and more on the defensemen. They don't really have. What I believe Jake Muzzin is injured again. Coming off a concussion, he got concussed again, which sucks.
Yeah.
Injury luck is difficult. It really is. And you can't account for that. You can't plan for that. But I think, a solid backup goaltender that they can trust has to be on their priority list for the trade deadline. It has to be. I don't think they can go into the playoffs with Peter Mrazek. Is Hutchinson still there? I think
so. I think he's in the Marlies, I think.
But he hasn't been very good either.
No.
So it's basically the Jack Campbell show. And I really like Jack Campbell because I watched the Maple Leafs documentary and Jack Campbell was such a, ray of sunlight in there. And then he got broken by the end. And I felt terrible for him. So then I kind of just became a Jack Campbell fan by proxy, just because I didn't want that man to ever be sad ever again. So they, like I said, they need to help him out. I think their priority should at least be a goaltender, because I don't think that they can go on like this.
No.
We've seen, like I said, Campbell is a good goaltender. He just needs to build up to having, a starter's workload. You can't just toss it all on a player, especially one that is on the Toronto Maple Leafs, the main character of hockey, with so much pressure and expectations on them. I get that, injuries kind of force their hand, but they need to, like I said, they need to help him out. Also, like I said, a defenseman would help too, because they really need to shore up that back end. There's no need for them to, add forwards. I don't think they really even need to change what they're doing at forward. I think it is just a defense and goaltending issue. And so far it's only causing these really ridiculous games, like the 10-7 games and stuff like that. But it will impact them in the playoffs if they let things get too far. And I'm pretty sure Kyle Dubas is going to be active at this deadline one way or another. So we shall see if they make the moves necessary, but it's just another chapter in their main characterness. It really is. And, whenever they eventually get over the hump, this will make it all the sweeter, I'm sure. But God, to be a Maple Leafs fan is to know torture like no other, I think.
No, something embarrassing always happens, and it's just, ugh, no thank you.
Yeah, and I kind of get that with the Flyers a little bit, but at least they are not the main character on Twitter. That will always be the Maple Leafs. And at least the Flyers can, be miserable and bad in their own forgettable way. The Maple Leafs, they are not unforgettable. That is 100% sure. But coming up next, we're going to end the show with pop culture talk, because usually Andrew and I do it, but, it's always nice when I get to talk to any guests on the show about their life other than hockey, because we all have lives other than hockey. I hope this is not the only thing we enjoy, because that is not healthy. We need to do other things, diversify our interest. But that'll be coming up right after this. This is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right, thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution, because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. And they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors. Yummy cinnamony churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. So good. They're going to be your new favorite. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, Puffs included. 100% real chocolate. Low calorie, high protein. Replace your candy bars with these. They're better. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. Go to Built.com and scroll down to the macros chart. You'll be blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Try flavors such as mint brownie, coconut, coconut almond, and new for this month, or at least it was for February, chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. And if you think a flavor might be good, they'll make it. It'll be delicious, and it'll be good for you. At Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first, then figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how, but they pull it off every time. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, Sarah, like I teased before we went to break, it is pop culture time. I want to hear what you have done, because all I've talked about the last couple of weeks are video games, and that's all I've been doing, and I'm having a great time doing it. But I want to hear what either you really love in pop culture and want to talk about and take this, 5-minute space to do so, or something that's really interested you over the last little while that you want to recommend to the listeners and viewers.
Sure. So this feels like something that probably like you would have brought up in the past on your own pop culture segment on the show. But I just finished watching the cartoon version of Legend of Vox Machina, which is for the uninitiated, the actual play tabletop Dungeons and Dragons Critical Role. It's a bunch of voice actors who got together and basically turned their house game into like a gajillion-dollar enterprise, because #nerds. But they, on the backs of like a enormous, like also huge #nerds Kickstarter campaign, was able to produce a cartoon of the first kind of like arc of the story that they did. And as a nerd that plays D&D in my own time with my own friends, I always wanted to get into Critical Role, but I was like, listen, I have time to devote to one 4-hour plus weekly D&D session, and it's my own, not one that like I'm watching strangers do, no matter how fun it is and no matter how much my friends are into it. And so I was like, oh, I just couldn't ever like justify the time commitment to get into it, especially knowing that there's like hundreds of episodes. So they came out with the cartoon, which is, it's 12 episodes. They're each half an hour long. They cut out a lot of the stuff that is like, for anyone who's ever played D&D, you know that sometimes you end up spending an entire 5-hour session shopping at like the fantasy store, or you spend like 2 hours arguing over rules, or like me that forgets how to do math or something.
Oh yeah.
So obviously it cuts out all of that because they made it into a cartoon. They sort of streamlined the plot. And it was fantastic. I kind of feel like I just want to go back and rewatch it again until like, and of course it leaves off as a huge cliffhanger, and all my friends are like cackling because they've all watched the original one, and I'm like, dang it, this is how they get me, because I'm too impatient to know what happens next, but I don't want to go read spoilers. Like, that's not fun.
Oh yeah.
So I'm like resigned myself to the fact that I'm just going to finally, years later, fall into the pit of streaming the actual show. But the cartoon's a delight. I feel like even if you're not a D&D person, it's really entertaining. It's accessible, even if that's not like your thing. So if you just like snarky fantasy stuff, like definitely go give it a watch.
Yeah, I've definitely recommended it because I am an OG Critical Role fan.
Nice.
I not that I got in on the ground floor, but I got into the show in the first campaign, so I have seen it through over the years. So it's really interesting to hear the perspective of somebody who has only watched it and has only known the show through the cartoon, because it just, as somebody who, because we watch it differently, you're watching it because you're interested. You don't know the plot beats coming up. You don't know all that stuff. The cliffhanger at the end, you didn't know about. But, as somebody who watched the original, and watched all of that, I had a feeling that was where they were going to end the season on, and boy, I was not disappointed at all.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk to you about it more. I know that this is probably not the space, but I will ask, who is your favorite character? Because I think I have an idea, knowing how the internet has fixated on one person in particular. So I will be interested to see if it is the same person, or if you have any other opinions about favorite characters.
I mean, it's definitely our sad goth murder hobo Percy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that is not a surprise. He is, if you're talking about main characters like the Maple Leafs, Percy is an anime protagonist to a T. And he feels like he's so out of place because he feels like he should be into gothic horror, but he's also an anime protagonist. He is a fascinating character. I really enjoy him a lot in the animated series. My favorite is Keyleth, though. I've always enjoyed her. Marisha Ray, I have to shout her out. She's a fantastic content creator, fantastic woman in media in general, because she's like the creative director for Critical Role now, and got a lot of hate for her character way back in campaign 1, and has since gone wilder and weirder with her characters over the campaigns. And I wanted to shout her out because as a woman in media, she just takes no nonsense, doesn't care about the haters, and it's really inspiring to me. So I've seen her in person a couple times. I was able to see Critical Role live before the pandemic at a live show in Chicago. And then I was able to see them do a panel in Philadelphia at PAX Unplugged, which is like the D&D tabletop, like not showcase thing. It's like board games and other stuff. So that's in Philadelphia, where I currently live close to. So I was able to see them a handful of years back. But she's great. The show is fantastic. Highly recommends the show just in general, Critical Role in general. Campaign 3 started more recently, so there's less than 20 episodes of that. So if you're looking for a more bite-sized thing to jump into, that's not nearly as long of a commitment, I would recommend that. But the show is great. There's a lot of content over the years, and it's great to see more people getting into it via the animated show. That's, I don't know, it's just neat to talk to somebody with a different perspective like that. And it's cool that things just must have been so different for you going through it, because not knowing what happens changes the way you interact with it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
though to be fair, I forgot a lot of stuff. So I knew the major beats, but I forgot a lot of
It's a
stuff.
lot.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there is.
My tweet when I finished watching the show was, "Holy crap, I can't believe they left the show off there." And the tweet from one of my best friends who watched the show was, "I knew they were going to leave off there." So,
Yep.
you know.
It was a popular theory when, when they announced the episode length and what they were going to cover. So I will be interested to see what happens next, and I hope you enjoy the vast archives of Critical Role, because it is a show that has brought me so much joy over the years, and that's kind of what we need, I think, right now in 2022. So before I do our exit. Thank you again, Sarah, for joining. Can you plug your stuff, plug the podcast? What are you up to? All that stuff.
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Right Said Sarah. It's WRITE said Sarah with an H. Locked on Kings is at Locked on LA Kings on Twitter. Of course, jumping in all the time to talk about the Kings and the Ontario Reign. I'm also the co-host of Western Conference Wednesdays on Locked on NHL. It's Jess Belmosto and I talking about all the stuff that's happening in the Western Conference. If you are a Carolina Hurricanes fan, I cover their prospects for Canes Country over at SB Nation. So writing about the Chicago Wolves, you can find that there. And I'm sure there's something else, but that's really it. Just come follow me on Twitter and listen to me complain about stuff, because that's what I do.
Oh, we'd love to hear it. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. But that is all we have for you today on the Cross-Check NHL Show. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice, from Apple to Odyssey to Spotify, and now YouTube, and rate and review us while you're at it. You can follow the pod at Cross-Check NHL on Twitter, me at Mary Clarke on Twitter, and Sarah at Right Said Sarah on Twitter. Thanks for making the Cross-Check NHL Show your first listen every Tuesday and Friday. We'll be back on Friday with some more puck talk, but now make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Hosts Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone help you become the expert of your fantasy league. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts.